Okay. Now I'm going to go through some examples from when I was traveling through Asia. I spent about, as I probably mentioned earlier in a previous video, but if not, I'll tell you now. I spent about a year bicycling across Asia. I went from Beijing to New Delhi, through China, through Tibet and Nepal, and into India, and then I spent another 6 months cycling through Southeast Asia, Vietnam, Cambodia. Laos, Myanmar, Thailand, and I also spent some time in Japan. So these are some images whenever I went to one of these countries. One of the first things I looked for was if they had a McDonald's, and I would always go into the McDonald's and get at least one meal in every country. I'm not some big McDonald's fan or anything, but I was always curious about what they looked like and how they might be the same or might be different. So here is McDonald's in Japan, and they have something called a Mega Mac. Now, do we have a Mega Mac in McDonald's in the United States? Well, no. We don't have a burger at McDonald's in the United States that's four patties of meat, an egg, and bacon, and all this stuff. We don't have this, but they do in Japan. Why? Let's put on our anthropology hats for a second and try to do some analysis of this. How would you interpret this Mega Mac? Well, the way I would interpret it is there are some stereotypes about Americans abroad, in particular in East Asia, that we are overweight, that we are big, we drive big cars, we live in big houses, we eat big food, all these kind of things. And so when a Japanese person wants to eat American food, they're like, oh, let's get some American food. They want it to be big. They want it to be quintessentially American. And so they go to McDonald's and they eat this giant thing. But at the same time, this burger is not American. This burger does not exist in the United States. So is this burger an example of cultural imperialism? Is this American culture in Japan? Or is this Japanese culture? Well, it's a little of both, I would argue. This is localization of the Mega Mac, right? This is the a representation of American culture as it is viewed through Japan. It is a stereotype of Americans that Japanese people have. So in that way, it actually, I would argue, represents more about Japan than it does about the United States. And if that is true, how could it be cultural imperialism? It might be economic imperialism because McDonald's is making a lot of money off of this or something. I don't know if it's cultural imperialism. I don't know if it's changing Japanese people and changing their thoughts and feelings about us or about American culture. In fact, it is a Japanese idea, not an American one necessarily. And again, it's an example of localization. So the next place I went, I was in Beijing, and I went to that very McDonald's that we saw that had 700 seats and 29 cash registers in Beijing. And while those images I took from Beijing were from 1987, this is from 2014, 2015, something like that. No, earlier, 2010 maybe? I don't remember. It's been a while. But as you can see, a lot has changed. So I don't know. Let's talk about some of the changes first. Look at these burgers. Does anybody know what these burger buns are made out of? These burger buns are actually made out of rice. So again, Chinese people felt like they weren't getting a real meal unless it included rice. They would complain that they were hungry even though they had just eaten a McDonald's meal. And so McDonald's responded to that by having rice patties. They've also responded to that by writing in Chinese on the menu so people can actually read them. They have these sorts of desserts in China that are made out of taro root, which is a sort of sweet potato, that are purple, very different. And these prices are still pretty similar, like $6 to $8 for a meal in US dollars. So what do you think? How would you analyze this if you were an anthropologist? Well, how would we understand this? Is this cultural imperialism? Well, I would say probably no. That why did McDonald's change? Why did McDonald's change? Why hasn't it retained the English menu? Why hasn't it retained all the things that made it attractive in the 1980s? Well, the answer is that for a lot of people that were born after 1987, for them, McDonald's has always been in China. They don't know a China where there wasn't McDonald's. So for them, McDonald's is exactly as Chinese as anything else is Chinese. It has just always been there. And so for them, going to McDonald's isn't special. They're not going there to learn about American culture because it's existed in Chinese culture. It is part of their culture. So instead, McDonald's has had to adapt to that. If people aren't going to go and eat there because it is different, because it is American, they have to eat there because they like it. And so they have adapted and localized their menu. So now, I don't know, is this American culture? Is this Chinese culture? Globalization, then localization. Cambodia too. Cambodia doesn't actually have a McDonald's, I don't believe. I never saw a McDonald's there or any other fast food chains, but they do have K Burger. K stands for Khmer, which is the dominant ethnic minority in Cambodia, and they have this Khmer burger it was the only place in the city that had electricity at that time. They had a generator out back. It's a very poor country. This is in Phnom Penh, by the way. It's the only place that had air conditioning, again, all powered by a diesel generator in the back. And it was one of the worst burgers I'd ever eaten. It was like sort of the RC Cola of McDonald's. It was just really bad and didn't taste good. But here it is crowded with Cambodian people going to eat. So does that mean that Cambodia culturally imperialized themselves? If it's a Cambodian restaurant copying McDonald's from other countries, this isn't McDonald's being forcibly placed on Cambodians. It's them opening up these businesses because there's demand by locals and tourists, right? So it complicates this image. Now, again, I also went to, you can see on my face, I am unimpressed with my burger and fries, but I also went to India, where McDonald's has been for a very long time. And this image on the left is from a cafe that was called Cafe Delicious, and everything is vegetarian. Again, it is a local restaurant where they have adapted to local demands. Many people are vegetarian in India, and so they have a sort of copycat restaurant where everything's vegetarian. On the right is an actual McDonald's, so McDonald's did come to India for them to copy, but you'll notice this is a Big Mac. Does anybody notice, what do you think this burger bun, or I'm not the bun, I'm sorry, the patty, what do you think that patty is made out of? Well, it's actually made out of turkey because many Indian people who are Hindu, do not eat cow because the cow is sacred. And so, it again has adapted. Everything else tasted exactly the same. It's just that the burger is turkey. So in South Korea, there's also these sort of shrimp burgers, and there's all sorts of stuff about the menu that is different. But in South Korea, they don't have drive-through culture, and they also don't really eat in as much as they do in China. So what they have is delivery culture. So long before the pandemic, when you and I first started ordering McDonald's for delivery, Korea has had delivery where these people tear around on the streets in these mopeds. And it's not just McDonald's, it's literally any restaurant. You can get a whole meal of traditional Korean food or any food you could want, and somebody brings it on these mopeds. And it's on plates, like real porcelain plates with real silverware, and you just sort of tear off a piece of plastic at top and you eat it. It's ready to eat, and it's not paper and plastic and all that, and styrofoam like we were used to. And when you're done with the dishes, you take them and you put them outside of your home, and in the middle of the night at like 2 a.m., like little fairies, all the mopeds go back out, and they all pick up all the dishes and wash them. It's this pretty efficient system, and you can get it any time of the day. It's amazing. So again, the way that you eat McDonald's in these other countries is just totally different than the way you and I consume McDonald's, in our cars most of the time. It's just totally different than in these other places. So it's this process we've been talking about: globalization, localization, and I'm going to add one more thought, and that's glocalization. So as we've talked about, globalization is the worldwide interconnectedness, rapid global movement of natural resources, human labor, financial capital, information, unfortunately infectious disease, and culture. But then things like McDonald's, they globalize, and then they localize, they change, and they become different. And this dual back and forth, globalization, then localization, then localization, we call that glocalization, the process through which global processes result in the provision of locally specific goods and services and bring locally specific information back to the global system. So one day, the crispy Chinese sandwich might globalize. It might go around the world, and we all might start eating crispy Chinese sandwiches, or a McCurry, or a McPuff, or all these other different kinds of foods that have localized in other cultures. Those might globalize again, and then they might localize again. And this back and forth is how most new culture comes into existence. Now I've got one more slide. It's a little gross. Be careful if you're grossed out easily. You have to look at my face really, really up front. Actually, I'll just leave it right there so you don't have to look at my face. But this is Wangfujin Street in China. Now, Wangfujin Street is just row after row of these stalls where you can go and you can get these scorpions. I'm eating a scorpion in this picture. There I am. Eat a scorpion. You can eat tarantula. I ate cat, I think. I don't know. I was told it was cat. I can eat, so I ate starfish. I ate seahorse, like anything, alligator, anything you could think that you could possibly eat is there. Now, why did I do that? I spent like $3, which you can get a real meal in China for like $3. Why did I spend $3 to eat bugs in China? What an idiot! Why would I do this? Right? Well, in my opinion, if I put on my anthropology hat and think about this, what this is a lot of people in Western countries and other countries in general have these opinions about Chinese people that they eat weird food. They eat weird stuff. And so when you go to China, you seek that out. You're like, I'm going to go to China and eat something weird because my friends are going to ask me, did you go to China? What did you eat? Did you eat cat? I've heard Chinese people eat cat. I hear they eat dog. Of course they don't. This Wangfujin Street with all this weird food is located just around the corner from that McDonald's that I ate at earlier. And I could have gotten a really good, authentic Chinese dish, in a restaurant for the price of this stupid scorpions, but I chose to spend money on the scorpions. So what am I consuming? Am I consuming Chinese food? Is this Chinese culture I'm eating, or is this American culture? Well, I would say this is, American culture. This is stereotypes about Chinese people in China.